Here's something that will make your blood boil. Right now and today, there are sitting U.S. senators who have voted against bills they personally co-sponsored. Let that sink in. They wrote the bill. They put their name on it. They shook hands in front of cameras and told you this was the right thing to do for America. Then when the vote came and when it actually mattered, they voted no. And you know what the craziest part is? Not a single major news network covered it. Not one. Because here's the dirty secret about Washington that nobody wants to say out loud. The game is not Democrats versus Republicans. It never was. The real game, the one being played right now at this very moment, is the political class versus the rest of us. And they have a playbook, a secret one that's been running for decades, one that was designed specifically so that by the time you figure out what's happening, the vote is already over, the deal is already done, and the money has already moved. If nobody in your life is telling you this, if your news feed isn't showing you any of this, that's not an accident. That is exactly why this channel exists. Hit subscribe right now, because Nation Pulse is the place where we break down what's really happening in Washington in plain language for real people. Not for insiders, not for lobbyists, for you. Hit that button, turn on notifications, and join this community, because what I'm about to show you today is just the beginning, and you need to be here for every single piece of it. Beat, settle. All right, let's get into it. Let's start from the top, because before we can talk about what's happening right now on the Senate floor, you need to understand the system they're operating inside. The United States Senate has 100 members, 2 from every state, 6-year terms, which means, and this is important, most senators never actually have to face the voters again for years at a time. Think about that. The average American changes jobs every 4 years. The average senator can spend an entire presidential cycle doing almost nothing accountable and still keep their seat, their staff, their office, their power. And here's where the playbook comes in. The playbook isn't written down anywhere. You won't find it in a bill. You won't find it in the congressional record. It lives in the culture of the institution. It's passed down from senior senators to junior ones like an unspoken rule book, and it has a few core principles that you need to know. Principle number 1, never let a crisis go to waste, but also never let it get solved. Now, you've probably heard the first part of that quote before, but the second part, that's the part nobody says out loud. Think about it. If healthcare gets fixed, the senators who've been running on healthcare reform for 30 years lose their fundraising base overnight. If immigration gets solved, the senators who've spent decades stoking fear about the border suddenly have no campaign ad material. The incentive structure in Washington is not to solve your problems. It is to manage your problems just well enough that you keep showing up to vote for them. That's not cynicism. That is a structural reality. Principle number 2. The vote you see is not always the vote that matters. This is the one that really gets people. Because most Americans think about legislation like this. A bill gets introduced, people debate it, there's a vote, and either it passes or it doesn't. Simple, clean, democratic, but that's the civics textbook version. The real version is messier, way messier. The vote you see on the Senate floor, the one they show on C-SPAN, the one they count, that vote has often already been decided weeks or months before it happens. It's been decided in committee rooms and in private phone calls and in fundraising dinners and in conversations that will never be recorded. The public vote is often just the final step in a process that was never public at all. Principle number 3, make it complicated so nobody can follow it. And this is the one I really want you to pay attention to because it's the most insidious one. Complexity is not accidental in Washington. It is a weapon. The more convoluted a piece of legislation is, the more amendments and riders and procedural votes it takes to get through, the less likely any ordinary American is going to be able to understand it, let alone hold their senator accountable for it. This is why you can have a senator vote against a bill that would have directly helped their constituents and then go on a local radio station 2 weeks later and say, well, I had some serious concerns about Section 14B, subsection 7, and the implications for the reconciliation process, and people's eyes glaze over and they move on. Complexity is the smokescreen, and it works every single time. Now, let's talk about what's happening right now, because the stakes of this particular moment in American politics are unlike anything we've seen in a generation. We are living through a period where major geopolitical events are reshaping the entire landscape of global power. And the Senate's response to it is revealing exactly who they're really working for. Let me break down what's been developing over these past several weeks. You've been watching the situation with Iran escalate into something that most foreign policy analysts never anticipated moving this fast. The United States military has been engaged in active operations in the region. An American-led blockade is going into effect. Naval forces have been neutralized. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet, the choke point through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes, has been at the center of military operations. And I want to be really clear about why this matters for a channel about politics and government, because some people might say, okay, that's foreign policy, that's military stuff. What does that have to do with the Senate? Everything. It has everything to do with the Senate. Here's why. Under the War Powers Resolution, a law passed in 1973 after Congress watched the executive branch drag the country into Vietnam without a formal declaration of war, the president is required to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing U.S. forces to armed conflict. And within 60 days, Congress has the authority to vote to authorize or terminate that engagement. That's the law. That's on the books. So here's the question every one of you should be asking your senator right now. Where is the vote? Where is the congressional debate? Where is the authorization? Where are the senators who spent years giving speeches about the importance of congressional oversight of military action? Where are they now? Because I'll tell you something. The silence coming from Capitol Hill on this question is deafening, and that silence is a choice. It's a choice that some senators are making because engaging with this question directly would require them to take a position. And taking a position means some of their donors might not be happy, or some of their constituents back home might ask hard questions, or they might have to admit that they've been inconsistent. So instead, they say nothing. They issue vague statements. They talk about supporting the troops. And the 60-day clock ticks. This is the playbook in real time. But there's another dimension to this moment that we need to talk about, and it involves an alliance that has been the cornerstone of American security policy for 77 years. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, formed in 1949 in the aftermath of World War II, when the world had just witnessed what happens when democracies fail to stand together against authoritarianism. The entire premise of the alliance is collective security, the idea that an attack on one is an attack on all, that no member nation has to face an aggressor alone. And right now, that alliance is cracking. Reports are coming out that multiple European nations, including Spain and France, refused to support American military operations and in some cases actively blocked U.S. bombers from using their airspace. The Spanish Prime Minister reportedly shut down Spanish airspace to aircraft participating in the operations. France's president reportedly blocked Israeli aircraft from traversing French airspace to transport munitions. And the response from Washington, from the Senate, again, silence. Or worse, deflection. Now, I want to be honest with you. I'm not here to tell you that American foreign policy is always right, or that the Senate should just rubber stamp whatever military action the executive branch decides to take. That is not the argument. The argument is about accountability. The argument is about the constitutional design of this government, a design that was built specifically to prevent any one branch, any one person, any one faction from making unilateral decisions with permanent consequences for 330 million Americans. When senators go quiet at the exact moment the Constitution calls them to speak loudly, that is not caution. That is not statesmanship. That is a failure of the institution. Okay, so we've established what's happening. Now let's talk about why it's happening, because the most important question in politics is never just what, it's always why. Why would a senator stay silent when their constitutional duty is screaming at them to act? Why would a senator vote against a bill they co-sponsored? Why would a senator campaign on one issue and govern on something completely different? Follow the money. I know that sounds like a cliche. I know you've heard it before, but I want to walk you through what following the money actually looks like in practice, because it's not what most people imagine. It's not some guy in a back room handing a senator a briefcase. It's much more sophisticated than that. And because it's sophisticated, it's much harder to see, which is exactly the point. Here's how the system actually works. When you are a U.S. senator, you spend an almost incomprehensible amount of your time raising money. Studies have shown that members of Congress spend between 3 and 5 hours every single day, while they are supposed to be doing their jobs, in what are called call time sessions where they sit in a room at their party's headquarters because they legally can't do it in their government office and make phone calls asking wealthy donors for money 3 to 5 hours a day, every day, of a job that was designed by the founders to be the most serious deliberative body in the world. And who do they call? They don't call the school teacher in their district. They don't call the mechanic or the nurse or the small business owner who's been struggling. They call the donors, the major donors, the bundlers, the people who collect checks from other wealthy people and bundle them together into massive contributions, the PAC directors, the industry representatives. And here's the thing about a conversation you have with someone when you're asking them for money. You don't say, give me money and I'll vote the way you want. That would be bribery. That would be illegal. But what happens is subtler and more durable than that. What happens is relationship building. What happens is that over years and years of these conversations, a senator develops a very precise and instinctive understanding of what their donor class wants, what makes them happy, what makes them nervous, what will cause the money to flow, and what will cause it to dry up. And that understanding shapes every single decision a senator makes, not because of explicit quid pro quo, but because that's just how human beings work when their livelihood depends on maintaining relationships. Now add to that another layer, the revolving door. The revolving door is the phenomenon where members of Congress and their senior staff leave government and immediately take high-paying jobs at lobbying firms, trade associations, and the corporations they used to regulate. And it goes the other way too. Lobbyists and industry insiders taking positions in the agencies and offices that oversee their former employers. The result is a permanent class of Washington insiders who move fluidly between the public and private sectors, who all know each other, who go to the same fundraisers and the same restaurants and send their kids to the same schools. And in this class, a senator's most important constituency is not the voters back home. It's the network, the ecosystem, the machine. That's the playbook. That's why it runs the way it does. Let me bring this back to something concrete because I don't want this to feel abstract. I want you to understand what the NATO situation means for your life, for your wallet, for your family. The United States contributes approximately 70% of NATO's total defense spending, 70%, for an alliance of 32 nations. Now, there are people who will tell you that America gets something in return for that contribution, and that's true. There are strategic benefits to maintaining alliances, to having bases in Europe, to the network of intelligence sharing and diplomatic coordination that the alliance enables. But here's the question that never gets asked clearly on the Senate floor. At what point does the cost-benefit analysis need to be publicly debated by the people who are constitutionally responsible for making it? Because right now, what we have is an executive branch that is openly furious with NATO partners for what it describes as abandonment during active military operations. And we have a legislative branch that is largely standing on the sideline, watching, not holding hearings, not calling witnesses, not exercising the oversight function that the Constitution explicitly gives it. The Senate has the power to influence treaty obligations. It has the power of the purse. It has the power to conduct investigations, to call witnesses, to demand answers. These are not theoretical powers. They are real constitutional tools that were specifically designed for moments exactly like this one. And here's what I want you to think about as a voter. Every senator represents you, not their donors, not the party, not the administration, you. That is the constitutional promise. And when you see a senator go silent during a moment of genuine constitutional significance, you have to ask yourself a hard question. Who is that silence serving? Because it is serving someone. Silence in Washington is never neutral. Silence is always a choice that has consequences for someone. And the question of whose consequences it's protecting is the most important political question you can ask. Okay, now I want to talk about something that I think is genuinely missing from most political coverage. And it drives me absolutely crazy. We're great at telling people what's wrong. We're terrible at telling people what to do about it. So let me give you the tools, real, concrete, actionable tools that you can use right now to engage with this system and hold your senators accountable. Tool number 1, congress.gov. This is the official website of the United States Congress, and it is one of the most underused resources in America. You can go to congress.gov right now, look up any bill that has been introduced, see who sponsored it, who co-sponsored it, how it was voted on, and what the full text says. You can track bills as they move through committee. You can see which committee your senator sits on. You can see their complete voting record. The information is public. The problem is that most people don't know how to navigate it. And that lack of knowledge is, I'd argue, at least partially by design. But the information is there. Use it. Tool number 2, your senator's website, and specifically their contact page. Here's something most people don't know. Congressional offices actually track constituent contacts. When enough people from the same state or district call or email about the same issue, it gets flagged. Staffers compile these contacts into briefings for the senator. It doesn't always change their vote, but it does factor into how they talk about issues publicly, and it absolutely factors into what they do in the next election cycle. Don't email through a form letter campaign. Write something specific. Reference a specific bill or vote. Tell them how it affects you personally. Those messages get more weight. Tool number 3, local news and local accountability journalism. This is one that people sleep on. National media often misses what's happening at the state level, and senators are far more responsive to local coverage than national coverage. A story in a senator's home state newspaper about their voting record or their silence on a major issue will get more attention from their office than a segment on a national cable network. Find out who the political reporters are at your state's major newspapers and TV stations. Follow them, share their work. The local press has less reach but more leverage over individual senators than most people realize. Tool number 4, primary elections. This is the one that the political class actually fears most, not general elections, primary elections, because in most states, primary turnout is shockingly low. We're talking about elections where sometimes as few as 15 or 20% of registered voters in a party actually show up to vote, which means that a motivated, informed minority of voters can have an outsized impact on who gets through to the general election. If your senator has been in office for 20 years and has consistently failed to represent your interests, the most powerful thing you can do is show up in the primary and support someone who will. The machine depends on your apathy. Your engagement is the disruption. I want to zoom out for a moment because sometimes when we get deep into the details of policy and procedure, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture right now is this. We are living through a period of genuine institutional stress in American democracy. That's not partisan. That's not an opinion. That is the honest assessment of constitutional scholars, historians, and political scientists across the ideological spectrum. The institutions that were designed to check and balance power in the Senate, the courts, the free press, civil society organizations are all under pressure simultaneously. And when multiple institutions are under pressure at the same time, the risk of democratic erosion goes up dramatically. Now, I want to be precise about what I mean by democratic erosion because it gets misused a lot. Democratic erosion does not necessarily mean someone in a uniform marching into a Capitol building and seizing power. That's the dramatic version. The actual historical record shows that democracies typically erode more slowly, more quietly, and more procedurally than that. They erode when institutions stop enforcing the rules they were designed to enforce, when checks and balances become theoretical rather than practical, when the people who are supposed to hold power accountable decide, for whatever reason, whether it's fear or ambition or simply the desire to avoid conflict, to look the other way. That's the slow slide. And the way you stop a slow slide is not with dramatic gestures. It's with consistent, persistent, engaged civic participation. It's with voters who know what their senators are doing, who understand the legislative process well enough to recognize when it's being abused, who show up not just in November of election years, but in the off years, in the primaries, in the local races that feed the pipeline for national office. It's with citizens who understand that democracy is not a spectator sport. It is a contact sport. And if you're sitting in the stands watching, the people on the field are going to make all the decisions. Here's the thing about this particular moment in American history. The information has never been more available. The tools for civic engagement have never been more accessible. And the gap between what people know and what they can know, between the power people have and the power they use, has never been wider. That gap is where the machine lives. That gap is where the playbook runs unopposed. Closing that gap, that's why Nation Pulse exists. That's what we do here. Let me pull all of this together because I want to make sure you walk away from this video with a clear, coherent picture of what we've covered. We started with the Senate's secret playbook. the unwritten rules of institutional self-preservation that explain why problems never get solved, why votes don't always mean what they appear to mean, and why complexity is a deliberate feature, not a bug, of the legislative process. We looked at the current geopolitical moment, a moment where active military engagement, an American-led naval blockade, a fracturing relationship with NATO, and significant questions about congressional war powers authorization are all happening simultaneously, and we tracked the Senate's response, which in too many cases has been silence when the Constitution demands engagement. We followed the money, not to a conspiracy, but to a structural reality about how a senator's incentives are shaped over years of fundraising relationships and revolving door connections to the donor class and lobbying industry. We broke down what the NATO question specifically means for American taxpayers and why the Senate's oversight role matters in this particular debate. And then we gave you tools, real ones, Congress.gov, direct constituent contact, local journalism, and the primary election, the most underused weapon in the Democratic arsenal. Here's the thread that runs through all of it. Power in a democracy does not automatically stay with the people who are supposed to hold it. It migrates. It gravitates toward concentration. And the only thing that keeps it flowing back toward the people, toward you, is accountability. Consistent, informed, institutionalized accountability. The senators who are running the playbook right now are counting on one thing above everything else, that you won't be paying attention, that you'll be too tired or too busy or too cynical or too confused by the complexity. They're betting on your disengagement. So the single most subversive thing you can do, more than any protest, more than any post, more than any tweet, is to pay attention, to understand what they're doing, to talk about it with the people in your life, to show up, to make it clear through your words and your votes and your contact with their offices that you are watching. Because the moment they know you're watching, the moment they feel that accountability, the playbook gets harder to run. Here's where I'm going to leave you. A lot of political channels will tell you that everything is broken, that the system is rigged, that nothing can change. And I understand why that narrative is appealing. It's clean, it explains everything, and it lets you off the hook. But I don't believe it. And here's why. The United States Senate has a 233-year history of being reformed by citizens who refuse to accept the status quo. The direct election of senators, that wasn't always how it worked. For over 100 years, senators were chosen by state legislatures, not by the people. The 17th Amendment changed that because ordinary Americans demanded it. Campaign finance reform, transparency legislation, ethics rules, term limit debates, all of these have been driven not by senators voluntarily giving up power, but by citizens organized and informed enough to demand it. The machine is powerful, but it is not invincible. It has been disrupted before. It can be disrupted again. And the disruption starts right here in conversations like this one with people like you who are willing to spend 25 minutes understanding what's actually going on instead of just absorbing the outrage cycle. So here's what I need from you right now. If this video gave you something real, if it gave you clarity or context or just a better framework for understanding what you're seeing in the news, then hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that this kind of content matters, and it helps more people find Nation Pulse who need exactly what you just got. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Because this is an ongoing story. The geopolitical situation is evolving by the day. The Senate dynamics are shifting. The legislative calendar is moving. And I'm going to be here every single step of the way, breaking it down for you in plain language with no spin and no agenda except the truth. And I want you to do one more thing. Drop a comment below and tell me, who is your senator and what is the one issue you wish they would take a real, clear, on-the-record stand on? Not a talking point, not a campaign slogan, an actual position with actual consequences. Tell me below. I read every comment, and your answers are going to shape our next deep dive. Share this video with someone in your life who you think needs to hear it, not to argue with them, not to prove a point, but because they deserve to have this information. They deserve to understand how the system works. Because here's the truth. A government that depends on your ignorance has already failed you. And a government that is held accountable by an informed citizenry, that is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. This is Nation Pulse. I'll see you in the next one.